Hello and welcome to another episode of Choices Fruit Interviews. We have an esteemed guest today with us. Uh, Fares Hedayati is with us today. I would actually let Fares introduce himself and give us a background of what he has done and what he does.
Sure. Thank you very much, Boris, for having me. Yeah, my field of studies is AI. So I did my PhD at Berkeley. I did also some of my undergrad studies at Baha'i Institute for Higher Education and then my graduate studies later. And yeah, my focus was on machine learning and more theoretical machine learning. And over the past more than 10 years, I've been in the industry. Using AI, and my field of studies, my field of, you know, my line of work, I mean, has been more on basically finding jobs for people, basically recruitment and using AI to help people find jobs.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much again for being here with us today. The topic of the interview today is on basically the use of AI in recruitment process, and specifically how the AI can be used to create equal and just employment opportunities. So you are
Great.
the perfect perfect candidate to answer some of our questions.
Thank you.
So the first question is, how is artificial intelligence used in job recruitment today?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Sometimes, when you're trying to recruit someone, you get for one job position, you get like thousands of resumes, sometimes even like hundreds of thousands of resumes. And it's usually on, it's not feasible for even a human expert like someone in HR or to go over all those thousands of resumes and find like the best candidates. So that's where AI comes into to help. Also, on the other side is also, it's also true for the other side of the market. Maybe some platforms, for example, LinkedIn or let's say a monster.com or other platforms, they get like jobs, they get hundreds of jobs or millions of jobs, and they have to find candidates for those jobs, and it's not feasible for to do it like manually, for human experts to go over those. So AI basically comes to help in this way that you build basically models and systems that understand the resume and understand the job description on the other and then try to match them. So that's maybe the more advanced AI. Sometimes, you basically recommend jobs to people or recommend basically candidates to employers based on people's interaction with the system. Like, for example, this candidate has been looking at these jobs, or he has applied to these jobs, he or she has applied to these jobs. And based on those, you would recommend like something to the employer and or even to the person who seeks jobs, they're basically the candidate. And so that's on behavioral side of things. That's more simple. There are some algorithms like collaborative filtering. So you recommend things based on people's past history, people's basically engagement with items and jobs, things like that. That's simpler, but more advanced ones are those that try to understand the actual text of the job descriptions and resume. And when semantics comes to meaning, you need some like more advanced intelligence to understand. For example, what are the required skills? What are the required educational level? What are the requirements on experiment for this job? And does this candidate have all those or no? Like, what percentage of those requirements are met by that candidate? So all of that should be automated, and AI basically can help there.
Thank you. Based on LeoForce, an AI recruiting technology company that surveyed 273 HR and talent acquisition leaders in North America in 2024, only 30 to 42% are leveraging AI, and mainly for a quarter of their process only. But it's predicted that AI adoption is going to spike. So based on this data, do you think is AI a just tool when we are sourcing for equal employment opportunity? And maybe I read the second question and you can combine them. And basically how it can be utilized to improve the process of recruitment and selection in order to ensure transparency and fair employment opportunities for all the candidates.
That's a very good question. Yeah, I think combining them would be good. So I think the best way I think for AI to be used is to basically empower recruiters. It shouldn't replace them. You know, there should be some human judgment also, like uh, experts' judgment in this recruitment process. You know, in machine learning and AI, there are like two concepts usually that we talk about. One is called the recall, and one is called precision, right? So let's say for a specific job, you have 5,000 applicants, right? So there's a job posting and you get 5,000 applicants. It's very hard, like for a human to go like and review all those 5,000 resumes and applications. And it's also maybe they can do it, but it can take them like maybe 2 months or 3 months, right? But you want to make a decision very quickly. So one thing is, let's say if that human expert reviewed all those 5,000 candidates, only 50 of them are very good, or like they meet all the requirements and they're good for this job. So at the end of the day, you have to interview those 50, right? So the question is, can you give me a sample of 200? So I'm asking like an artificial intelligence system to give me 200 candidates. Now the question is, can the system, in these 200 examples that it gives me, it retrieves from that 5,000 applicant pool, do we get all those 50 in those 200? Like the jobs that are retrieved by the system, does it include all those perfect examples? If it does, the recall is 100. So we're capturing all of them. If not, let's say if it can only retrieve, for example, 40 of them. So that's 40 over 50. So that's 80%. So one way that AI can help is basically increase that recall, right? So if it can identify all those 50 good candidates in the pool of candidates that it gives us. For example, now so it gives us 200 examples, 200 candidates, and those 50 are among them, right? Now a human expert should go over all those 200 examples and identify those 50, and then interview those 50 and basically continue doing that. So in a sense, here we are combining AI and human expertise to identify those 50, rather than for a human being to go over all those 5,000 candidates. We ask AI to give us 200 candidates, potential candidates, and then human experts review those 200 and give us those 50. So it reduces the size of the pool that we have to review. So that's a lot of AI systems are optimized to improve recall, basically. So that's one way that people do. But the other way is basically improving precision, right? So some AI systems are like, they give you, for example, 200 examples, but the top 50 are very likely to be those 50 that we are looking for. So the top 50 results are very precise, so they are very accurate. So those systems, they require less human involvement. But in general, I think it would be better to rely on the first system, the system that basically improves recall. It tries to find all the good candidates in the pool that it provides. So this is one way to go, but the other way is that there are certain attributes in your data. For example, gender, country of origin, race, these things. So in order for your system to be just and fair, so you have to make sure that you have, for example, your data is representative of your entire population. For example, your training data is not like 99% male and like 1% female. So the more data you have, the more accurate your model is, right? So it would be better if your data is more representative of your population. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is how you evaluate your model. So let's say so every model has some bias and some inaccuracies, right? So let's say your model is 90% of the time correct, right? So if your model is 95% of the time correct, you look at those 10% of times that it makes mistakes, right? So when it makes mistakes, you say, okay, I have to evaluate those inaccuracies or when my model fails on different attributes or different subpopulation. For example, does it make a lot of mistakes on female population versus male population or certain races against others? So you have to make sure that this error is equally distributed among the subpopulation. Sometimes maybe a subpopulation the error should be even lower than the majority. Maybe some unrepresented communities or groups, you don't want your model to make more mistakes on them. You even want your model to make less mistakes on them. Things like that. You have to make sure that that's the case. But there are like sources of biases and inaccuracies. We can actually talk about those in other questions. But in short, the bias and the problem could come from your data or from your model. So maybe your data is not collected correctly, or it doesn't represent everyone in your population. That's one problem. Another problem is maybe your model makes mistakes or is biased towards certain populations. So you have to control for that. You have to check for that.
Great, thank you. I think the next question is actually pretty relevant to what you were saying, but I still ask it. You might have already answered somehow, but it says, how can AI tools be leveraged to accommodate individuals with disabilities and underrepresented communities in the recruitment and selection process? I think you answered, but I still let you.
Sure. That's a very good, very good question. So one is basically you have to make sure that your data, you have enough data for those unrepresented communities or people with disabilities or certain attributes. But one problem is that sometimes, because like unrepresented communities, you might naturally don't have enough information about them, like in your training data, because AI models are trained on data, like massive amount of data. So one way to make sure that even if your data is skewed and you have less data on those populations, one way to deal with that is a lot of AI models, basically, when you give them data, you can also put weight on your data points, right? So let's say if you have two population in your, like two major population or subgroups in your data, and one of them maybe your data is comprised of like 80% of the first group and like 20% of the other group. So you give the first group lower weight and the second group higher weight. So, and the weight is usually proportional to is reversely proportional to the percentage of, for example, first group, maybe like it's male and female, you only have 20% of data from female applicants and 80% from male applicants. So the weight of male applicants is 1/80, but the the other one is 1 over 20. So the female applicants would get higher rate. So you're basically telling the model that focus more on the female on this ratio. And if the ratio is correct, so you're kind of unbiasing your training data. So that's one way to unbias is basically putting more weights on the representative communities. And then the other one, sometimes, you would basically want to artificially boost some subpopulation. So maybe your final prediction, if the applicant or the data is from an unrepresented community, basically you boost the prediction, you multiply them up, or like there are certain ways to boost them, but the simplest one is like to multiply by a factor. So at the end, you want, for example, your expected result of one community to be equal to the expected result of the other community. So you can adjust for that. So that's another way. But there's as I said earlier, a third way, which is very important, is to make sure that your model inaccuracy or inefficiency is equally distributed among different subgroups. For example, if you make 10% of times you make mistakes and you look at that number, so for example, for female applicants, that number is not like maybe 20%, but for male, for example, is 8%. On average, it's 10%, but if you look at your subgroups, maybe one subgroup, the average is much larger than the other subgroup. So the averages should be more or less equal. So you have to basically account for that. So that's another way. But sometimes, maybe let's say you try to improve your model and everything, but it fails, right? So for one subgroup, your model is very inaccurate. So there you have to have more human involvement, even if you cannot improve the model. And so you pick a threshold, say, okay, if my model is making this prediction with this certainty, like if the certainty is above something, I'm pretty sure it's accurate. So you use the model. If it's below some threshold, you try to involve human expertise to your system. So yeah, there are different ways to deal with that. And yeah, I think those three ways are a good start.
Thank you. This is great. Well, I think the next question you answered it. It's actually talking about again the data that is available, because as you mentioned, the models are trained based on the available data. So their performance is influenced by the quality and quantity and representativeness of that data. So like you said, if the data is not well represented of the community, so it can miss on excellent candidates that might belong to those underrepresented communities. The question, again, I think you already answered that, how companies can ensure the machine learning models and AI algorithms are fair and unbiased. I think we covered that. Probably, I don't know if there is anything else you would
Sure.
like to
Yeah,
add.
sorry, one other thing I forgot to mention is that sometimes, to deal with fairness, actually it's you don't have so there are certain rules and regulations in AI that you have to abide by. And one of them is that you shouldn't, many companies basically they enforce this. And I think that these regulations are becoming more universal. So one of them is that in your data, for example, you shouldn't put the race as a feature, or you shouldn't put gender as a feature. So you shouldn't use those kind of information, or country of origin, or even first name and last name of people, or where they live and all of that, because the model can guess from people's first name and last name where they're from, or even from like where they live and all of that. And so you shouldn't use those kind of information in your system. If you don't use them, the model is more trained on merit, people's merit, rather than like other attributes that they don't have any control over, like where they're from, what gender they are, things like that. So that's another way that people do that. And one other thing I wanted to mention about this representative data, there is a bias called presentational bias. So let's say, for example, that you have a platform um, and people search for products in that platform and they purchase products when they see them, right? And so let's say they search for something, let's say they want to buy a book. So they type a book, or they want to buy, for example, a shoe or something. So they put the name, they do some search and they see some results. They click on some of them, they buy some of them, but they look at some others and they don't click on them, things like that. So the system knows now that, like, for example, this user likes these kind of products or buys these kind of products and something. And it collects these data and basically refine its model. So it trains a new model with this data. But the problem with this approach is that uh, the first algorithm that recommended these items or these products to the user is basically introducing a presentational bias. So you're training on the data that the user has seen. And that data came from another algorithm. But you never trained the model on the data that it never saw. So there might be some other products or items that the user is interested in, and you never showed it to the user. So there's a bias there. So one way to control for that or like mitigate that problem is sometimes you have to randomly show other products or other items to the user. That's also true in like a search, like for example, Google search or search engine search. The search engine shows you some documents or some websites that you click on some but it's very rare that you go over all, for example, 10,000 search results so those that are towards the end of the search result pages, it's very unlikely that you don't even review them. So the way to handle that is like maybe like 10% of the time you show items from the last pages or like that are very ranked very low. So the users are maybe 10% of the time exposed to other things. So you learn from them. So that's another way you have to basically correct your data set to basically handle the presentational bias. But there are other ways to handle presentational bias. For example, I think YouTube, what they do is when they recommend something, they also put, like when they train a model to recommend you a video to watch, they put the rank of the video as a feature in their training, but remove it at the inference time. So it shows that, for example, this person watched this video because the rank was like they try to basically find the contribution of the rank. So you show the person like 10 videos, and it's very likely that they click on the ones that are on the top, right? Like the first 3 videos or 4 videos. But what's the, can you quantize that? Like, what's the contribution of being on top versus the quality of the video, and if the video is really of interest to you? So to quantize that, they use the rank of the video as a feature when they train the model. So this way they know, for example, you clicked on the video 10% because it was on top and 90% because it matched your basically interest. Things like that. There are other methods that also handle this presentational bias, but that's another source of bias that's introduced to the data.
So in the YouTube example that you used, by rank, is that like the number of views? I don't think I know what would rank
Sure.
be.
So definitely, yeah. So the first video has rank 1, the second video has rank 2, the third video has rank 3, and so on and so forth. So so if the rank is very low, it's on the top, does it mean that it contributes to you watching that video? or not. So you should watch the video because it matched your interest, not because it was shown on top, right? Not because the rank was very low. So you basically put the rank as a feature to tell the model, did this person watch this because the rank was low or because it matched its interest? Something like
But
that.
overall, how do they evaluate the rank? How is the rank um, basically evaluated or
Yeah, so
what?
right. So let's say you have the one time you have the rank and one time you remove the rank. So if
Okay.
you have the rank, what's the probability of that person watching the video? So let's say it's 90%. And one time you remove the rank, and what's the probability? It's like 75%, right? So you subtract 90 from 75, so it's like 15%. So the contribution of the rank was, in this case, maybe 15% of that specific rank. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, but there's a lot of so this presentational bias is a big topic, in AI when it comes to recommendation, basically.
Thank you.
Sure.
um, on April 24th, 2024, the US Department of Labor issued guidance on how employers should navigate the use of AI in hiring and employment practices. The Department of Labor emphasized that eliminating humans from the processes entirely could result in violation of federal employment laws. Although guidance was addressed to federal contractors and is not binding, all private employers stand to benefit from pursuing compliance with the evolving expectations concerning use of AI in employment practices. Based on this piece of information, what are some potential challenges or risks associated with the using of AI in recruitment process? And what are some basically potential unintended consequences of relying too heavily on AI in the recruitment process?
Exactly. So that's a very good question. At the end of the day, for example, if AI is very good at capturing recall, basically finding all the good candidates in a pool that it provides, but at the end of the day, it should be human beings who judge the final results, right? So AI can provide you with a pool of candidates, but human experts have to go and review them. But if we remove that human expert in a step, then the problem would be that, because all AI models, they have some bias or they have some like inaccuracy. So the models are not perfect. They're like some model, like the best model could be like 99% correct, but 1% incorrect. But if you scale that, let's say you have 1 million candidates, so 1% of a million is a large number, right? So because of that, I think because no AI model is perfect, you have to have some human, basically, involvement, and also you need to basically human experts should also check the model. Like when they create the model, AI practitioners, they have to check the final model and see if it has biases on some populations. And the way they usually do that is like this: they have the data, they randomly split the data to training and testing. So with the training data, they create a model. The testing data is like they put it aside as if they haven't seen it, right? So that the model is not exposed to the testing data. And they test the final model on that testing data, maybe on that 30% of the data. And there they can find like all the biases and inaccuracies. And so a human being should basically do that process and make sure it's not biased. And one other thing it has skipped my mind is the AI should be also explainable. So sometimes, when the decision is very important, uh, you have to be able to explain why AI came to this conclusion, right? So that's called explainable AI. But some models in AI are very explainable. For example, decision trees model or logistic regression model. These are like very simple models. But some more advanced models and more recent technologies are not very explainable. For example, deep learning or like no, yeah. So deep learning is usually it's kind of like a black box. You give it an input, it you know gives you an output, and the output, for example, you give it a candidate and a job, and the output is either the candidate is a good fit for this job or not. For example, that's the output, or the probability that the candidate is a good fit. Usually, if the model is not explainable, you just have a number. But if the model is explainable, you say this candidate is a good fit because, for example, his skill set matches the requirements of the job, or his education is good for this job, or, for example, he has similar like history, like basically work history to this company, things like that. And each of these elements, for example, contribute to the final answer. For example, you say the skill match contributes 10% to the, and you can quantize all that, like 10% to my answer. Educational match contributes 25%, things like that. Job history contributes like 75. So, and you can explain this to basically anyone. So in many cases, like people prefer explainable AI. Usually it's less accurate. So it comes at a cost, but if the decision is very important and you have to make sure that like every decision that you're making, you can explain it and you have you have a reason for that decision, you should use explainable AI. You shouldn't use like black boxes, things like that. So that's another thing that people discuss.
Thank you.
Sure.
Astonishingly, technological progress has enabled computers to perform the tasks of architects, medical doctors, music composers, and even 16th century artists. So, understandingly, there is a concern regarding job losses caused by automation replacement. But a study by UNDESA's Development Policy and Analysis Division lists 3 reasons that why such predictions that we will have a planet of that all the robots will do the work for humans will be unrealistic. And these 3 reasons are such automations usually are designed to excel at a very specific set of tasks, so they will rarely be able to replace the whole entire occupation. The second reason is new technologies not only destroy but also create jobs. Throughout history, technological innovations have enhanced the productivity of workers and created new products and markets. And the third reason is that just because it is technically feasible to substitute an entire profession with computers does not mean it will happen. Various economic, legal, and regulatory, sociopolitical factors will prevent many occupations from disappearing. A recent study found that by 2016, only 1 out of 270 occupations listed in the 1950 US Census had been eliminated by automation, and that was the elevator operator. So I think based on this concern that I think it's very prominent, I think we have all heard that, there are these concerns about job losses by automation, by AI. How can individuals and workers use AI capabilities and such technologies to their advantage instead of being threatened by them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, when the internet came to being, the advent of the internet, like many people said, oh, this is going to like take away a lot of our jobs or things like that. Or when, for example, industry, or when agriculture was like industrialized, like many farmers thought like this is the end of farming. We're not, we are going to lose our jobs. But at the end of the day, like these technologies, they basically empowered people. So it was a tool and it helped them to automate things. But at the end of the day, human involvement was not fully eliminated from the process. So yeah, I think this is a tool that can empower people. But on one hand, you have to regulate the use of AI the same way you have to regulate the use of the internet, right? So you shouldn't use the internet to promote hate speech or promote violence or terrorism, things like that. The same way you should, regulate the use of AI to prevent such things. But at the same time, I think you have to democratize AI. So AI shouldn't be a tool for like a certain group of people. So everyone should be empowered to learn how to use them. The same way, for example, when the printing technology came to being by Gutenberg. So before that, books were only for the rich. People with financial means could afford to buy books and like be educated, things like that. But after the printing press came to being, and printing technology came to existence, everyone, like access to books and reading materials became more ubiquitous, and like more people had access to them, and it helped everyone. So the same, I think we should treat AI the same way. So we should empower everyone to use AI. So now there is this thing, for example, large language models. Chat GPT is kind of like a black box. You don't know how it is working, and you have to pay for it. So it's not, people with financial means can afford to use it. But on the other hand, you see these large language models that are open sourced. So many people or many companies, create large language models and they make it open source, so people can basically download them, customize them for their own use case, and people with some computer science skills and programming can easily learn how to use them. So I think this is the right way to do it, like to make things open source so everyone can contribute to it and everyone can use it. So this is at the more maybe advanced level, but at the less advanced level, like anyone who wants to use, for example, AI to for proofreading things, for checking their work, things like that, they should be able to do that. Like I think democratizing AI is the key. Democratizing it and regularizing it, basically. Putting regulation on it. They should basically go hand in hand.
I think you already mentioned that besides the employers that they utilize AI for their recruitment process, the applicants also, the people that are searching for jobs, they also, there are tools that they can utilize AI. So we know that job applicants, they utilize AI-powered technologies to craft compelling application materials such as resume, cover letter, and even preparing for the interview questions. This could be a great disadvantage to applicants who don't have access to such resources, who are probably already experiencing unjust employment opportunities. So how can employers bring into consideration such disparities? And also, I guess another question is how can also employers spot if these tools are dishonestly used and if there is exaggeration by the candidates?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are the excellent questions. I think there's no right answers to them, and there's some potential solutions. These are like very open source questions, open-ended questions, I mean. So for the first question, I think, sorry, what was the first question?
So how, because these tools, they exist, that they can help the candidates. How
Right.
can not become a disparity to certain
Exactly.
candidates?
Yes. I think this is a very, very, very important thing. So this, I think, goes back to democratizing AI. So we have to educate everyone to have how to use AI, and it's the same way like people, you teach people to use basically the internet, different tasks. So that's one thing. But on the other hand, you should also, your models should basically take this into consideration that some people like from certain areas or like with certain demographics or even certain in terms of like financial means, some people might not have access to AI, things like that. So their models should be aware of that, and it should basically compensate uh, those applicants. For example, like certain population do not have access to AI or like more advanced tools. So the model maybe should artificially boost the outcome for them, or maybe it should train. So let's say if you're trying to recruit people, maybe train two models. So one is for people with access to AI and one with people with access with no access to AI. And at the end, when you're recommending job, or like when you're recommending candidates to employer, maybe pick 20 from the first group, the top 20 from the first group, and the top 20 from the second group. So both are like equally exposed to the employer. Uh, when I say the top 20, usually like the models, for example, the model tries to predict the probability that this user is a, or this candidate is a good fit for this job. So this, the thing it predicts is a probability, is a number between 0 and 1, right? So maybe for the first group, your numbers are very high. Like the top 20 are like above like 90%. But for the second group, the people like people with less uh, or less frequent access to AI, that probability, like the top 20 probability goes from like 80% to like 90%. But still it doesn't matter, right? So you have split the group in two parts. And even though the numbers on the right is and the second group is lower, but within that group you find the best people. And you make sure like the best in the second group are equally exposed to the employer as the best in the first group. So there are ways basically you can uh, you know mitigate that problem. But yeah, I think it's very important for companies to acknowledge that the problem exists. Such a problem exists, and you have to basically try to solve it. So this is one way. And then the other question I think was like for some people like try to it's kind of like a plagiarism, right? You try to ask AI to help you. So it could be a good and a bad thing at it. So if people, they created like a perfect resume and things like that, so it means that they can use AI very efficiently. So it's to their benefit, right? So maybe employers should acknowledge that. But at the other hand, it should also like when it comes to skills or like some answers, like the employer asks you a few questions to solve, and some of these questions are like very hard questions, and you didn't solve it yourself, like you asked AI. But I think the employer should be able to ask you to explain that answer. So if you can explain it, it means you understood it. So that's okay. But if it's completely like you just copied it from AI without understanding, I think sometimes like teachers ask students to solve a problem, but they say it's open book, right? So you can use the internet, you can use your books, anything. If you can solve it using all these sources, and if you can explain it, I think that's then you have understood it, you have learned it. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's a very challenge. Like plagiarism and AI, I think is a big question, even for in education, how people can detect plagiarism. And there are some softwares that can detect plagiarism, but detecting plagiarism in AI, I think, is an extremely hard task. It's becoming very hard. And I give you an example. There's this model in a generic model algorithm in AI called GAN. GAN. So what it does, it tries to basically create images that are very close to your training data. For example, the model is exposed to, for example, Van Gogh's paintings, right? And it learned to basically create paintings as similar as Van Gogh's painting, but like it creates one painting. If you compare this painting to all of the existing work of Van Gogh, none of them are equal to this. But if you show it to a person, says who painted this, that person can say this is Van Gogh painted this. So it mimics the style and everything. So it's extremely hard to distinguish a fake image from a real image. And deep fake is basically based on that technology. So AI itself, sometimes it's basically, many times, in many cases, is trained to basically to make the fake data or the synthetic data, detection of synthetic data impossible. So AI is trained to do that basically. So now you want to use AI to defeat itself, right? So and it's very extremely hard to do that. So I think the second question I think is a very hard one.
And I guess another part of it is to maybe work on the individuals and their morality
Exactly.
to be,
Yes, exactly.
practicing honesty and
Definitely, yeah. That's a very good point. I think that's where ethics and morality comes to play, because any new tool can be used in either way, right? For example, nuclear technology can be used to create bombs, or it can be created to use energy. So at the end of the day, we are practitioners, we're users of this technology. And education is very important, like from young age, from like when people are starting to use these technologies, they have to be educated to have this moral compass all the time.
Thank you so much. This actually concludes the prepared questions that we had for you today. This was a very fruitful discussion that we had. If at the end there is anything else that you would like to share or you would like to add, please feel free to use this time to share with us.
Sure. No, thank you very much. This was a very interesting conversation. And as you said, I think your last point of the importance of morality and education, I think in this whole process is very important. And this should start from a very young age, because so these are new phenomena that we haven't been exposed to. For example, the internet, the AI, all of this. It gives you some freedom, but it also comes with responsibility. So how do you teach this responsibility to kids and to young adults and to junior youth from an early age? And yeah, so we weren't exposed to this, for example, 2 generations ago or 3 generations ago. These are new things that we're exposed to, and it requires new regulations and ethics and things like that.
Thank you, dear Faris, for being with us today. And this concludes our interview today. Thanks for watching.
Thank you very much. Have a